Billionaire secretly followed his intern after work. What he saw left him in tears. Before we continue with the story, tell us where you're watching from and how old you are, and subscribe to our channel to receive new stories every day that will touch your heart. I hope you enjoy the story. The city sprawled beneath Liam Vance's penthouse, a glittering, indifferent sea of lights and hurried lives. From his floor-to-ceiling windows, the world felt like a distant, sterile painting. This glass fortress, high above the chaos, was more than just a home. It was a physical manifestation of his soul. It was silent, impenetrable, and built on the ashes of a devastating betrayal that had hollowed him out years ago. He had amassed a fortune with his company, Vance Tech, but peace had long since been traded for power. His days were a relentless cycle of board meetings, market analyses, and a vigilance so fierce it felt like a sixth sense. The constant, exhausting hunt for disloyalty. Every person who entered his orbit was subjected to this silent scrutiny. They were all pieces on a chessboard, and he was the master player, wary of every pawn's move. This cynical existence was his armor, the only thing that kept the ghosts of his past at bay. But then Isabella Costa arrived. She was an intern in the marketing department, a small, vibrant splash of color in his monochrome world. Liam noticed her from a distance, not because of her looks, though she was undeniably pretty, but because of her work. Her ideas were fresh, her presentations flawless, and her focus was a laser beam of quiet determination. She was, in every measurable way, the perfect employee, yet a single recurring flaw in her perfect routine snagged on his hardened instincts. Every day, as the clock on his desk ticked precisely to 5 p.m., Isabella would pack her things with a hurried grace. The excuse was always the same, delivered with a polite, almost apologetic smile to her supervisor: "I have a family commitment." The phrase was innocuous, but to Liam it was a siren's call of suspicion. A family commitment. What kind of commitment was so absolute, so unyielding, that it demanded her punctual departure every single day? His mind, a labyrinth of corporate strategy, began to fill with possibilities. Was she a spy? A plant from a rival company, using her talent to steal Vance Tech's secrets and feed them to the competition? The paranoia he had so carefully kept leashed started to bubble to the surface, a venomous whisper in his ear. On a cold Thursday afternoon, the city outside was a blur of rain and grey sky. Liam sat at his sprawling mahogany desk, his signature barely visible on the final page of a multi-million-dollar contract. He wasn't focused on the document, but on the clock on his wall, its hands creeping toward 5. He couldn't shake the feeling. His gut, honed by years of ruthless business, screamed that something was wrong. He slammed his pen down, the sharp click echoing in the silent room. He reached for the intercom. "Jensen," he said, his voice flat and authoritative. His chauffeur's voice responded instantly. "Yes, Mr. Vance?" "Get the car ready. I need you to follow someone for me. No questions." There was a brief pause on the other end, but Jensen knew his boss's rules. "Right away, sir." Liam stood, walking to the window. He watched the employees file out of the building below, their faces a sea of anonymous intent. He spotted her easily. Isabella, with a small, worn satchel slung over her shoulder, walked briskly toward the street. The rain seemed to bounce off her with a resilience he hadn't expected. "Follow the intern," he ordered, his voice a calculated monotone, devoid of emotion. He was a general issuing a command, a hunter setting a trap. He couldn't just confront her. That was sloppy, emotional. He needed proof. His mind, now a machine of corporate espionage, was already dissecting her every move, mapping out the logical steps to expose her. The plan was flawless, cold, and cruel. He was ready to dismantle her facade. What he didn't know was that his life, his carefully constructed fortress of solitude, was about to be obliterated by a truth he wasn't prepared to face. The silent pursuit began, a journey that would take him far from his glass tower and into a world that would challenge every single one of his beliefs. The sleek black luxury sedan was an alien presence on the narrow, crowded streets. Liam's driver, a man of quiet efficiency, navigated the labyrinth of cracked pavement and fading storefronts with practiced ease. They had traveled a world away from the sterile glass towers of the financial district into a part of the city where the air was thick with the scent of street food and the distant rumble of a subway. Liam watched the transformation unfold outside his tinted window, the meticulously planned cityscape giving way to a raw, vibrant reality. His own car felt like an intruder, a symbol of a life that had no place here. The suspicion that had fueled his pursuit was slowly being replaced by a gnawing, unfamiliar curiosity. He saw Isabella first as she stepped out of a yellow cab, her small frame dwarfed by the bustling street. She was wearing a simple jacket he'd never seen before, and her usual poised demeanor was replaced by a sense of urgent purpose. She didn't look back. She walked with the confidence of someone returning home. Liam's heart, a muscle he thought had been hardened by years of corporate battle, gave a strange, unexpected lurch. He watched her approach a squat, brick building with a door that was a riot of color, covered in what looked like children's graffiti. A modest handwritten sign, barely noticeable, was taped to the glass. Real Dream Art Studio. The name itself felt like a punch to his gut. He told Jensen to park around the corner, his voice hushed and low. "Wait here. Don't move." The moment the car was still, Liam got out, his expensive leather shoes a sharp contrast to the worn concrete. He felt exposed, out of place. He moved with a kind of predatory caution, the instincts of his business world kicking in. He found a hiding spot behind a grimy brick pillar, his suit jacket pulled tight around him, and peered through the large, smudged window of the studio. And then he saw it. The scene inside was nothing like the clandestine meeting he had imagined. Isabella wasn't a spy. She was a teacher. The room was a mess of creative chaos, easels with half-finished paintings, pots of brightly colored paint, and tables strewn with paper and brushes. In the center of it all stood Isabella, her dark hair pulled back in a loose, messy bun, with a few rebellious strands framing her face. Her cheeks were smudged with a streak of bright blue paint, and she was talking to a small group of children, their eyes wide with adoration. "Okay, class," she said, her voice a soft, melodious sound he had never heard at the office. "Who can tell me what colors we mix to make purple?" A little boy with a gap-toothed smile shouted, "Red and blue!" "That's right, David," Isabella laughed, a genuine, joyful sound that resonated deep inside Liam. He had never heard her laugh before, not once in the months she had worked for him. In his office, she was a professional, efficient and quiet. Here, she was vibrant, alive, completely and utterly herself. She knelt down next to a little girl struggling with her brush. "It's okay, Fatima," she whispered, guiding the child's hand with infinite patience. "Just a little bit at a time. See? You're a natural." Liam stood frozen, the cold rain forgotten. He saw the way the children looked at her, saw the pure, unadulterated happiness in their faces. He saw how she was giving her time, her energy, her heart to these kids, using the paltry intern salary he paid her to keep this place running. The family commitment wasn't a secret business deal. It was a chosen family, a community she was building from the ground up. The cynicism that had been his shield for years began to crack, then shatter. He felt a wave of emotions crash over him. First, profound shock, then a wave of crushing shame. He, a man who had built an empire on trust and ruthlessness, had suspected this woman, this selfless, brilliant woman, of being a corporate spy. He had reduced her to a cliché from his past, a potential villain in his own self-pitying narrative. The betrayal that had hardened his heart wasn't just about a stolen business idea, it was about the loss of his ability to believe in the fundamental goodness of people. His resolve to expose her crumbled into dust. He felt like a fool, a shallow, empty shell of a man who had more money than he could ever spend, but was utterly bankrupt in spirit. He had to talk to her. He had to apologize. But the words, the sophisticated arguments he could use to close a multi-million-dollar deal were suddenly meaningless. How do you apologize for a complete lack of faith? The bravado of the boardroom was useless here. The challenge before him was no longer about winning, but about becoming a man worthy of her forgiveness, and he had no idea where to start. The following morning, the air in Liam's office was thick with a tension he couldn't shake. His reflection in the massive glass wall showed a man who looked exactly the same, crisp suit, controlled demeanor, but inside he was a maelstrom of conflicting emotions. He sat at his desk, a stack of quarterly reports lying untouched before him, his gaze fixed on nothing. His mind was a replay of the previous evening, the vibrant colors of the art studio, the uninhibited laughter of the children, and most of all, the genuine, radiant smile on Isabella's face. He knew his calendar was packed with meetings, but they all felt hollow, meaningless. He wasn't a CEO today, he was a man with a confession, a man who needed to apologize for a sin of cynicism. He had called Isabella to his office for what seemed like a routine report on a new marketing campaign. He told himself this was just a convenient way to get her alone, but his hands trembled slightly as he hit the intercom button. When she finally walked in, she was the picture of professionalism. She held a neat stack of papers, her posture perfect, her face a mask of polite efficiency. It was a stark contrast to the paint-smudged, radiant woman he had seen yesterday. He knew he had to break through that mask, and the guilt of what he'd done made his throat feel dry. "Isabella," he began, his voice firmer than he felt, "you can put that down. We're not going to talk about the report." She blinked, surprised, but her composure didn't falter. She placed the papers on the corner of his desk and stood waiting, her hands clasped loosely in front of her. "Is there a problem, sir?" The words felt like a fresh cut. He sighed, the sound of his own breath a profound admission of his failure. "Yes, there is. Isabella, I need you to be completely honest with me. What is this family commitment you have every afternoon at 5? A flicker of surprise, then a shadow of unease crossed her face. She looked away, her cheeks flushing a delicate pink. It's a personal matter, Mr. Vance. It doesn't affect my work. I always make sure everything is finished before I leave." "I know it doesn't," he replied, his voice softening. "And you're right, it shouldn't be my concern. But it is." He took a deep breath, the admission feeling like a heavy weight being lifted from his chest. "I know what it is. I was there last night, at the art studio. I saw you with the children." The shock on her face was immediate and raw, a fragile glass shattering. Her eyes, which had been so full of professional calm, now widened with disbelief, then filled with a deep, cutting hurt. You followed me," she whispered, her voice barely audible. Her hands, which had been so composed, began to tremble. I thought you trusted me." The accusation was a direct hit to his core. He hadn't realized how much her respect meant to him until he saw the pain in her eyes. "I didn't trust you," he admitted, the words a bitter pill. He stood up, walking around his desk to put some distance between them, a desperate attempt to create space for his shame. "After a bad experience, I swore never to trust anyone again. People I considered family, people I thought were loyal. They turned on me. I thought you were just another one of them, a spy from a rival company, using your talent to get close. I thought I was protecting myself and my company, and I was wrong, completely unforgivably wrong. I am so sorry, Isabella." Tears, silent and steady, began to roll down her cheeks. "The studio is my life, Mr. Vance," she said, her voice cracking. "I use my intern's salary to keep it running, to buy supplies, to give those kids a place to feel safe and create. It's not for you to worry about." "No," he said, his voice rising with a new intensity. He walked toward her, his tone no longer one of apology, but of fervent conviction. "You're wrong. You're wrong because I had no right to suspect you in the first place. You're wrong because you shouldn't have to do it alone." He saw the genuine goodness in her, a light that had been missing from his life for so long, and in that moment he realized something profound. He didn't just want to help her with the studio, he wanted to be a part of that world she had created. The fear of being rejected by her, the woman who had unknowingly shattered his fortress and shown him a world of genuine purpose, was a terror far greater than any financial loss he had ever faced. He was no longer a magnate protecting his empire. He was a man, vulnerable and exposed, begging for a chance at redemption. The silence that followed Liam's apology was no longer heavy with shame, but with a fragile, almost hopeful anticipation. Isabella, her eyes still glistening with tears, simply stared at him, trying to reconcile the cold, detached CEO she knew with the vulnerable man now standing before her. He wasn't just confessing, he was revealing a chasm of loneliness she had never seen. Liam, sensing her hesitation, took a slow, deliberate step back. He ran a hand through his hair, a nervous gesture she had never witnessed. "I know this is a lot to take in," he said, his voice softer now, "and you have every right to tell me to leave you and your studio alone. But I have a proposal." He walked back to his desk, picking up a sleek black tablet. "Vance Tech has a corporate social responsibility fund. It's small, mostly used for PR events, but we can change that. We will change that." Isabella, her thoughts a whirlwind of confusion and disbelief, finally found her voice. What are you talking about?" she asked, her tone wary, but her curiosity piqued. Liam turned the tablet toward her, his face earnest. "I don't just want to help you keep the studio running. I want to help it thrive. I can allocate resources. My team of project managers can help you with the logistics. We can bring in volunteers from Vance Tech, expand the program, get more children involved. Anything you need." He saw the flicker of hope in her eyes, a light she had been desperately trying to keep alive. For years, she had fought this battle alone, stretching her meager intern salary, begging for donations, and patching up leaky roofs with her own two hands. The sheer weight of that struggle was always a shadow hanging over her, no matter how much joy she found in teaching. Now, here was this man, a man who just yesterday had been her accuser, offering to carry that weight with her. But with that hope came a paralyzing fear. The Liam Vance she knew was a man of calculated moves. What was the hidden cost? "Why would you do this?" she asked, her voice trembling slightly. "What do you get out of it?" He didn't flinch. He met her gaze directly, and in his eyes she saw not a hint of a hidden agenda, but a raw, unvarnished honesty. "Because you showed me what real purpose looks like," he said, the words coming from a place so deep it felt like a confession. "My success, it's just numbers on a screen, but you're building futures. You're giving these kids a second chance, a voice, a dream. You made me realize that all the power and money in the world is meaningless if it doesn't serve a greater good. I want to learn from you, Isabella. I want to be a part of that world you've created." His humility was disarming. This was not the magnate she had read about in business journals. This was a man stripped bare of his defenses, offering a part of himself he had kept locked away for years. She saw the genuine desire for redemption in his eyes, and a profound shift happened within her. The fear began to recede, replaced by an overwhelming sense of trust. She nodded slowly, a small smile finally gracing her lips. "Okay," she whispered. "Okay." And just like that, The unspoken agreement was made. The conversation didn't end with a signed contract, but with a handshake, a gesture that felt more binding than any legal document. Their relationship, once defined by a simple employer-employee dynamic, began to evolve. They started spending evenings together, not in his penthouse, but in the art studio. Liam, who had always lived in a world of stark figures and data, found himself surrounded by the vibrant chaos of a world he never knew existed. He helped Isabella hang new easels, painted alongside the kids, and listened with rapt attention as she explained her vision for the studio's future. Their collaboration became a dance, a harmonious blend of his corporate efficiency and her creative passion. He brought order to her finances, and she, in turn, filled his life with color and laughter. For the first time in years, Liam felt a profound sense of purpose that had nothing to do with market shares or profit margins. He was building something that mattered, and it was all because of her. Isabella, meanwhile, was falling in love. She saw the man behind the CEO, the gentle spirit who could get on his knees to tie a little boy's shoelace, the patient soul who would sit for hours just watching her teach, the kind heart that wanted nothing more than to be a part of her world. It was a love she knew was impossible. He was a billionaire, she was an intern, but it was a love that was changing her life, giving her the courage to dream bigger than she ever had before. What she didn't know was that Liam too was falling, and falling hard. He would catch himself watching her, the way her hair fell over her face as she worked, the way her eyes lit up when a child finally understood a concept. His world of numbers was slowly, beautifully, being filled with the unquantifiable joy of Isabella. The partnership they had forged wasn't just a business deal. It was a path to a romance neither of them had ever dared to imagine. The partnership between Liam and Isabella blossomed into something neither of them could have anticipated. With Vanstech's full backing, the real Dream Art Studio was no longer a makeshift haven, but a beacon of hope. The walls, once scarred with peeling paint and water damage, were now vibrant canvases, alive with murals of starry nights and soaring birds painted by the children themselves. Supplies, once a constant struggle, now overflowed on freshly built shelves, cans of glossy paint, endless stacks of drawing paper, and new easels that stood tall and proud. Vanstech had become the main sponsor, and Liam, once a benefactor from a distance, had stepped fully into the role of a mentor. He was no longer just the man who wrote the checks. He was the one who listened intently to Isabella's ideas, who helped her draft business plans, and who, without either of them realizing it, had become the new center of her world. The feeling was mutual. Liam's meticulously planned days, once a monotonous grind of boardroom battles and market analytics, now revolved around his interactions with Isabella. The weekly project meetings, which used to be a chore, were now the most anticipated part of his week. He found himself inventing excuses to linger, to discuss not just the studio's expansion, but the small details of their lives. He would ask about her day, about the progress of a particularly shy student, about her favorite art movements. Each shared laugh, each quiet conversation over coffee, dissolved the professional distance between them. It was a slow, beautiful erosion of the walls he had spent a lifetime building. Then came the day the erosion was no longer slow. They were in his office, huddled over a blueprint for a new classroom. As Isabella pointed to a section of the plan, her hand reached out and for a fleeting electric moment her fingers brushed against his. A jolt, like a static shock, coursed through them both. They pulled their hands back as if they had been burned, their eyes locking in a silent, charged moment. The air in the room, which had been light and collaborative just a second ago, now crackled with an undeniable, awkward tension. They both looked away, their faces a furious shade of red. a sudden, sharp acknowledgement of the unspoken feelings that had been simmering beneath the surface. From that day on, Isabella grew distant. The fear that she had so carefully suppressed now came roaring to the surface. She was terrified of what she felt. She had seen how his past betrayals had hurt him, and she was petrified that her feelings, so messy and unprofessional, would ruin the beautiful partnership they had built. She began to avoid his gaze, kept her answers short, and would quickly excuse herself from their shared moments. Liam, sensing her sudden retreat, felt a cold knot of panic tighten in his chest. His old demons, the fear of being abandoned, began to whisper in his ear. One afternoon, unable to bear the silence, he went to her desk. "Isabella," he said, his voice low and serious. She flinched, startled by his presence. "You've been avoiding me all week. What did I do wrong?" Her eyes, wide and full of an unreadable emotion, darted around the office, trying to find an escape. "You haven't done anything wrong, Mr. Vance," she replied, her voice strained and barely above a whisper. I don't know how to handle this new dynamic." For the first time in his life, Liam found himself completely without a strategy. He saw the genuine panic in her eyes, and he knew he couldn't let her go. He couldn't pretend this was just about the studio anymore. "Isabella," he began, his voice dropping to a near whisper, a profound confession in a room full of people who couldn't hear. "I have feelings for you. I fell for you a long time ago, and I have no idea what to do with that." The silence that fell between them was so absolute, it felt like the entire office held its breath. Isabella's own breath hitched in her throat, her heart pounding a frantic rhythm against her ribs. She was in a state of shock, unable to believe that the man she loved, a man who had seemed so untouchable, had just confessed his feelings for her. "Liam," she started, the words a raw, broken plea. He stepped closer, his hand reaching out, not for hers, but hovering in the space between them, as if asking for permission. "Please don't push me away. Please tell me what you're feeling, because if you don't feel the same, I will respect that. I'll go back to being your benefactor, but I can't go on pretending that this partnership is only about the art studio." Isabella looked at him, tears welling in her eyes, not of sadness, but of a dizzying, overwhelming relief. She had spent weeks battling her emotions, fearing they would be her undoing. But now, in the face of his honest vulnerability, she knew she didn't have to fight anymore. She'd been afraid of her feelings, but now she was ready to surrender to them. The love that blossomed between Liam and Isabella became the cornerstone of a new era at Vance Tech. Hand in hand, they launched the Vance Tech Foundation, a bold initiative to fund arts and education in underserved communities, expanding Isabella's studio into a thriving network of creative havens. Liam's legendary cynicism, once an impenetrable fortress, had given way to a profound sense of purpose. Isabella's unwavering dedication and belief in the power of art to transform lives had inspired not only Liam, but the entire company. Employees who once saw Vance Tech as just a paycheck now rallied around a shared mission, volunteering their time and skills with a newfound passion. But even as their present was filled with light, a shadow from Liam's past still lingered. One blustery, rainy evening, they were in his penthouse, a stack of blueprints for a new foundation center spread across the coffee table. The city lights below twinkled through the rain-streaked windows, a silent testament to the world he had once conquered alone. Isabella, feeling the quiet solemnity in the air, reached out and placed her hand over his. "You've been quiet all evening," she said softly, her thumb gently stroking his knuckles. "What's on your mind?" Liam sighed, a deep, weary sound that came from the very depths of his soul. He looked down at their intertwined hands, then met her gaze. "The man who betrayed me," he began, his voice low and strained, "the one who made me build all these walls. I can't stop thinking about him tonight." He closed his eyes for a moment, the memory a ghost he couldn't exorcise. It wasn't just a business betrayal, Isabella. It was my best friend, my partner. We built Vance Tech from the ground up together, over long nights and too many cups of coffee. He was family. He stole our core technology and sold it to our biggest rival. It wasn't just the money I lost. It was a part of me, the part that believed in friendship, in loyalty, in people. His voice cracked with the weight of the memory. That's why I built this fortress, you see. I thought if I stayed inside, if I never trusted anyone again, I'd be safe. Isabella, her heart aching for the pain she heard in his voice, moved closer, wrapping her arms around him. "Oh, Liam," she whispered, her cheek resting against his. "I'm so sorry. No one should ever have to go through that kind of pain." She held him tight, a silent promise in her embrace. "But you know I would never do that to you. I would never betray you." Liam pulled back, his hands gently cupping her face. A faint, sad smile touched his lips. "I know," he said, his eyes filled with a gratitude that felt more profound than any love she had ever known. "You taught me that trust isn't a weakness, it's a risk worth taking. You taught me that generosity isn't a flaw, but a value. You saved me, Isabella." What he didn't know was that a seismic shift was about to change everything she believed. The following day, Isabella was at the art studio, overseeing the installation of new computers donated by the foundation. As she was directing a technician, a face from her past appeared at the door. It was Marco, a dear friend from her college days, now a struggling artist in the community. She hadn't seen him in years. "Marco!" she exclaimed, her face lighting up with a joyous smile. "It's so good to see you. What are you doing here?" Marco's smile, however, faltered as his eyes fell on a framed photograph on her desk, a picture of her and Liam, smiling proudly at the foundation's opening gala. His face went ashen, and he took a step back. That's Liam Vance?" he asked, his voice barely a whisper, a strange mix of disbelief and venom in his tone. "Yes, that's him," Isabella replied, her confusion growing. "He's the man who made all this possible. He's the love of my life." Marco shook his head, a bitter laugh escaping his lips. "I can't believe this. Of all the people, do you know who he is? Who he really is?" Isabella's heart began to beat a frantic rhythm. "What do you mean? What are you talking about?" Marco looked at her, his eyes filled with a deep, sorrowful pain. "Liam Vance was my brother's mentor, his partner. You know the story he tells about being betrayed, about his best friend stealing from him. It's all a lie. My brother didn't betray him. It was the other way around. Liam falsely accused him, manipulated the situation, and pushed him out of the company to get all the power for himself. My brother, he was brilliant, but Liam's greed destroyed him. He lost everything, his career, his reputation, his peace. He moved overseas and never recovered. He swore he'd make Liam pay one day. The blood drained from Isabella's face. The words felt like a physical blow, a betrayal so deep she couldn't breathe. The man she loved, the man who had taught her about generosity and trust, was a liar. The story of their love, their partnership, the foundation, it was all built on a foundation of deceit. She couldn't process it. The image of the heartbroken man who had confessed his pain just last night clashed violently with the ruthless, greedy opportunist Marco described. Her faith in Liam, the faith she had worked so hard to build, crumbled into dust. That night, the silence in Liam's penthouse was not a peaceful one. It was a suffocating, heavy blanket of unease. Isabella stood by the window, her back to him, the city lights below a mocking testament to the world she now saw in a new, horrifying light. When he walked in, she turned to face him, the tears streaming down her cheeks. She held a single sheet of paper in her trembling hand, a printout of a news article about the legal battle between Liam and his former partner, filled with cryptic accusations and ambiguous resolutions. "What is this, Liam?" she asked, her voice cracking. "What is the truth? Who are you, really?" And in that moment, the entire carefully constructed world they had built together hung by a fragile thread, about to unravel completely. The confrontation was not a storm, but a cold, final wind. Isabella stood in the center of Liam's office, the single news article clutched in her hand. Her face, usually so full of vibrant life, was pale and stark. Liam watched her, his own heart hammering against his ribs, unable to comprehend the change in her. "What is this, Liam?" she asked again, her voice a raw whisper. "I have a right to know. I need to know." Liam, seeing the piece of paper, felt a jolt of alarm. "That's a lie, Isabella," he said, his voice rising in desperate denial. "That's an absurd claim. I don't know where you heard it, but it's a complete fabrication." But his fear, the tremor in his voice, betrayed his words. His past aversion to discussing the betrayal, the way his face would darken with pain, suddenly made a horrifying new kind of sense. It wasn't the wound of a betrayal he was hiding, it was the guilt of his own actions. Isabella shook her head, tears streaming down her cheeks. "I don't believe you anymore, Liam," she said, her voice breaking. I want to believe the man who helped me, who taught me about purpose, but the man who hid the truth from me, who lied to me, I don't know that man." The world they had built together, the foundation, the studio, their love, crumpled in that moment. The trust she had worked so hard to build, the trust he had so desperately sought, was gone. She turned and walked out, leaving him standing in the middle of his office alone. A man who had everything but had just lost the only thing that truly mattered. Weeks passed in a haze of a hollow solitude. The vibrant colors of the studio in his memory were replaced by the gray stillness of his empty penthouse. He couldn't work, he couldn't eat. He was consumed by a single desperate need to find the truth. He started digging into the past, into the dusty archives of old news articles and legal documents from the legal battle. He spoke to old employees, to his former lawyers, and every conversation pointed to the same thing. His best friend, his former partner, was not the villain he had painted him to be. Broken, Liam realized he had to find him. He traced his ex-partner's movements to a remote village in a far-off country and booked a flight without a second thought. The journey was long and filled with a profound sense of dread. What would he say? How could he face the man he had wronged so deeply? He found him in a small, rustic workshop, surrounded by the smell of sawdust and fresh-cut wood. He was older, grayer, but his eyes still held the spark of the brilliant man Liam remembered. The moment they locked eyes, a torrent of years of pain and anger and grief washed over them. "I know," Liam said, his voice raw. "I know the truth. I was wrong. I was manipulated, but my anger at losing you, it made me blind. It made me believe the lie." His ex-partner, a man who had lost his company, his career and his reputation, simply stared at him. "What do you want, Liam?" he asked, his voice filled with the weight of years of silent suffering. "I want your forgiveness," Liam replied, his voice breaking. "And I want to fix this. I want to tell Isabella the truth." To his shock, his friend simply nodded. "I know you do," he said, a faint, sad smile on his face. "I know you loved her. The old Liam. He would never have done any of this. It was the love that changed you, not the money." He then spent the rest of the night helping Liam, giving him documents, files, and everything he needed to prove his innocence to Isabella. He was a man who, after years of resentment, finally found peace in forgiveness. Back in Lagos, Liam went directly to the studio. He found Isabella alone, sitting on a child-sized chair in the middle of the room, surrounded by half-finished paintings. She looked up, her eyes wide with a mix of fear and surprise. "I know," she said, her voice a whisper. "Marco told me." "He was wrong," Liam said, his heart pounding. He walked toward her, a manila envelope in his hand. He was wrong about what happened, but he was right about one thing: the truth. "I was the one who was lied to, Isabella. I was a victim, not a villain." "But I should have told you." He opened the envelope and placed the documents, the proof, in her hands. "I'm not asking for your forgiveness. I'm just asking for a chance to be the man who you taught me to be. The man who trusts. The man who loves you." Isabella read the documents, her hands trembling. She saw the evidence, the names, the dates, the cold, hard proof of a manipulation so vile it was impossible to deny. She looked up at him, her heart filled with a mixture of profound relief and a painful regret. She had doubted him, had allowed the seeds of doubt to grow into a fortress of her own. She had been so afraid of a betrayal that she had betrayed him with her own lack of faith. "Liam," she whispered, tears streaming down her face, "I'm so sorry." He shook his head, his hand reaching out to wipe a tear from her cheek. "Don't be," he said, his voice filled with a profound love. "My cynicism, it wasn't a flaw. It was a wound, and you are the one who healed me." In that moment, their romance, which had begun with a lie and almost ended with a doubt, was reborn. Liam, the magnate who had once lived in a fortress of solitude, now had the love of the woman who taught him the value of trust. And Isabella, the intern with a secret, now had the love of a man who loved her for exactly who she was. The romance, which began in suspicion, ended with the certainty that a true love can heal any wound. We want to hear your opinion about this beautiful love story. Let us know what you thought of this plot full of emotions and surprises. Tell us your name, where you are watching from, and what score you would give this story from 0 to 10. A story that touched hearts. And if you enjoyed the storyline, don't forget to like and subscribe to the channel so you don't miss the amazing new stories coming up. See you next time.